Oof, any glasses. Good evening. We'll call the regular meeting of the Board of Trustees to order at 6:01 p.m. That clock is slow. We'll move to open session. We'll start with the flag salute. Trustee Jimenez, would you like to lead us in flag salute, please?
Everybody, please stand. Put your right hand over your hearts. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Trustee Haug, can you please read the district mission statement?
Of course, Berryessa Union School District provides all students the skills to become lifelong learners and successful 21st century global citizens.
Thank you for that. And Trustee Nguyen, can you help us with the norms of the Board of Trustees?
Yes, the Berryessa Union School District Board of Trustees agreed to focus on the best interests of students at all times, be respectful, listen openly, address problems and process, not persons, keep each other informed, maintain confidentiality, work toward the future, learn from the past, equal participation from all members, and to stay on task.
Thank you for that. And may I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Agenda is adopted 5-0. Are there any public comments on the consent calendar agenda items? There is none. Let's get. May I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Consent calendar agenda items are approved 5-0. I'll just go through this. All right. No comments from the public on non-agenda items either. We move to superintendent's report. If you have anything, Dr. Fuentes.
Yes, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I just want to give my thanks and appreciation to all of our staff that are running our summer programs this year. We have quite a bit of students that are being engaged at Morrill Middle School, at Northwood Elementary, as well as at Dr. McCurry. I know one other side, Laneview, and Laneview. Each summer, we have more and more children that are participating through our ELOP funds, so we're really glad to be able to provide that service for them. But, it is a quick turnaround to go from the close of school to the start of summer. And so want to thank our summer co-principals as well as the classroom teachers and the support staff for making sure our students have a smooth transition into this next extended learning opportunity for them. And again, just want to remind everyone in our community that our school consolidation advisory committee continues to do work in that area. We will have one final meeting tomorrow that they will be reviewing educational programs that all of our school sites offer. That meeting is held in our district boardroom. It is open to the public if anyone would like to come and observe the conversations that are occurring. And then the committee will be going dark in July, and they will reestablish their meeting schedule in August. But definitely thank all of our parents and our staff that are part of that committee, and they've been very dedicated to the process and have asked really good questions about, our school facilities and about, continued work that our schools need and really getting a good understanding of the declining enrollment and the impact that has on expenditures, but also on student learning programs and opportunities that we'd like to provide for our students. And then finally, I just want to wish everyone a wonderful summer. I hope everyone has a good opportunity to rest and rejuvenate with their families. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Fuentes. Are there any comments or announcements from the board? Ms. Boak, do you have anything?
Just wishing everyone a safe and happy summer.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to review and action. Item A is A1 is item A is educational services. Number 1 is 2024-25 LCAP and other related items. Dr. Fuentes?
Yes, thank you. So during our last meeting, we had the opportunity to hear from Dr. McCurry and the educational service team about all of our goals and objectives that are outlined in our LCAP. It also demonstrates all of the actions that we plan to pursue over this next coming year and the resources that have been allocated for those action items. As a result, it is recommended the board approve the local control and accountability plan, our LCAP federal addendum, and the budget overview guide for our parents for the 24-25 school year.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions from the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move for approval.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you for that. Next item under business services. Number 1 is 2024-25 budget adoption. Dr. Fuentes?
Thank you. For this item, we also had a presentation at last meeting, but we had some technical difficulties. So we'd like to, again, provide our community another opportunity to learn more about our budget and our current position with this, with all the different impacts we've had with state funding this past year. After the presentation, it is recommended the board adopt the 24-25 budget as presented and direct staff to submit the state the prescribed forms and criterion standards to the county superintendent of schools. And so with that, I'd like to invite Kevin Franklin, our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services, to provide his presentation.
All right, good evening. So I'm here once again to go over the presentation. As Dr. Fuentes mentioned that I went over last time, so that's why the date still reflects the last special board meeting date, because this is just kind of a review again of what was previously presented. So getting to what is now outdated, the governors may revise. There's subsequently been a legislative proposal for the budget, and then a budget agreement that was reached over this past weekend with the governor. The budget hasn't been signed yet, but we do kind of know what the parameters of everything that was agreed to, and it's very similar to what was in the May revision. So I'll just kind of give a couple of those updates as we go through the slides as to where some of those changes might be, but really all of the changes that came in the governor's budget agreement that he will be signing later this week really all happened outside of education and on the other part of the state budget, impacting other areas of state funded programs. So nothing really changed on the education side. So I'll just point out a couple of the little differences. So the biggest change from January to May and now subsequently June is the COLA of 1.07% for education and for the state. So that's a statutorily calculated number. But if you remember back in January, that COLA was at 3.76%. So that's a significant change. For a district like ours, that's a significant impact to our projected revenues, not only for this upcoming year, but then there were also adjustments to the COLA and the 2 out years of the budget as well. They weren't as significant as this 3.7% reduction. Or 2.7%, sorry, reduction, but it's still enough where it makes a significant impact to our budget and multi-year projection. So the way that the governor was proposing to deal with this significant decline in state revenues was mainly, like I just mentioned, on the non-Prop 98 side of the budget. So, to different health and human services, some of the other programs like that are being impacted outside of education. So that actually came to fruition in the governor's budget agreement. There are very minimal cuts. He's actually maintaining what's constitutionally supposed to be provided within Prop 98. So that's good. but we're going to feel the impacts of that elsewhere within the state. The one positive is that I did see just this morning that state revenues are coming in slightly higher than the governor projected for this current period. So that's a positive note. They're not coming in significantly higher, but they're still coming in slightly higher than what was projected. So any of that type of increased revenue at the state level is going to be a good thing for our budget. So the budget problem was mainly because of a spike in capital gains from the pandemic. And so we still have an upward trend within the economy. So they don't predict a recession. They still are predicting economic growth, just not as significant of growth that we saw in the past couple of years because of the pandemic. So when you look at everything, we usually have a pretty steady growth, and we've actually had a really long period, historically long period of growth, with the state economy, that they're not projecting a recession, and it's not actually a recession just because the revenues went back down. It's just normalizing and then continuing on at the same trajectory. So a lot of what impacted those revenues were the delay in tax filings for the state and at the federal level. So the federal government, if you remember, extended the tax deadlines for the past 2 years to October. So instead of the state knowing in April what its revenues would be for the upcoming fiscal year, we had to wait until October, and that was all based on projections. So a lot of what happened is a lot of the projected revenues didn't materialize, and so that's why we have this significant decrease, especially from January till now. So that was the biggest impact. So that's where we had this huge, budget deficit that they keep talking about. So there was a $32 billion shortfall in 2023 as a result of these decreases in revenue. So that's a huge decrease. The January budget then projected another 37.9 billion shortfall. So, these numbers are just getting extremely large, especially when you go back to the days not more than 10 years ago or so, when the state budget was about twice of what the shortfall is. I mean, everything has significantly grown over the past 5 or 6 years. A lot of it aided by the pandemic, but a lot of what the proposed solutions were going to be for the 24-25 budget year for the state were spending down reserves. They were doing fund shifts and doing deferrals. So in the budget agreement for 24-25 at the state level, there still are some deferrals, but they're very small, they're very minimal, and the impact is not even going to impact our operations here within the school district. There will be some deferrals, but they're deferrals over a short time period, so they won't really impact our cash. So the state looks like they're having some, what in their eyes is some longer term solutions to the state budget deficit. But again, all of it is all predicated on the economy still continuing this upward growth. So if there's any slowdown, any of those revenues that I just mentioned of having that slight increase from what the governor's projecting, it'll really impact all of these mitigating factors that they're using in the budget to balance out the state budget. So these are the 24-25 funding factors based on School Services of California and calculated by the state. So as I mentioned, 1.07% COLA is then applied to all of the 23-24 base grants. So you can see that increase. It's about $110 on average increase for the grade levels that we service here in the district. And then you can see how that also impacts the 20% supplemental grant add-on. We do not qualify for the 65% concentration grant. That's for unduplicated counts over 55%. So we don't qualify for those dollars. So really, you're looking at everything but the bottom line of that chart. This is the school services dartboard. So the 2 out year COLAs in 25-26 and 26-27 go up to 2.93% and 3.08. Both of those are down by either 0.25% to 0.5% from what was projected back in January. So again, not as significant of a decrease, but still a decrease overall that impacts our funding over a multi-year projection. The other thing to take note of on this chart is right below that with the CalSTRS and CalPERS employer contribution rates. So CalSTRS is staying constant at 19.10%, but you can see CalPERS, which is our classified staff's retirement fund, is still continuing to grow over the next number of years. So increasing this year from 26.68% to 27.05%, and then to 27.60% and 28% in 26-27. Unemployment insurance is 0.05%. That actually had gone up significantly during the pandemic and made a few $100,000 impact to our budget back then, but is subsequently gone down. So this is back at the normal rate. So we're kind of seeing those type of things return back to normal. Statewide average reserve levels. This is a slide that I have every year. So you can see on that middle part of the chart, elementary school districts such as ours, how the reserve levels have grown over the past number of years. Most of it was due to the pandemic. That's why you saw some of the big growth, because in 2021, that's when we got a lot of the first rounds of COVID funding. Those sat on the unrestricted side of the budget, even though they were restricted in nature. And so a lot of districts then saw a rise in their reserves. And then now you're seeing a little bit of a spin down over 21, 22, and 22, 23, but still at 25%. And we're sitting around 6 or so percent this year, and then going down to the 3% level for 24, 25 and beyond. So significantly below the statewide average. But again, when looking at the statewide average, taking into account districts that are, all over the state having different demographic factors than we have, and the high pressures of cost of living and things of that nature. So the impact of COVID on the multi-year projections. So one of the main things that's been seen during the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic is the drop in ADA percentage amongst all of our grade spans. And so you can see the ADA to enrollment ratios and how those have changed from 1920, which was pre-pandemic, to 22-23. So TK to 3 dropping by, 3.6 or 3.7%. That's significant. All of them dropped by about, 2 to 3% across all grade spans. And so for a district like ours, historically, we've been around 96.5 to 97% ADA to enrollment, and now we're at about 94.5, just depending, but that's the percentage that we're using right now in our projections, because that's pretty much what we've had the past 2 years. So, we had 1 year during the pandemic when we had the distance learning that we were doing, so attendance was high. That kind of helped buoy us a little bit, but once we've returned to school, what we've seen some pretty significant declines in percentage. But the one thing to take note of is that on average with this across the state, you can see that the average is about 92.5%. We're a couple of percentage points over that. So we're doing really well with our attendance compared to the state average. But just historically within this community, we're about 3% under, kind of following the same trend throughout the state. Here's the statewide ADA enrollment percentages and funded ADAs by year. You can see the spike in funded ADA in 22-23 was due to the hold harmless that we all had. So, the enrollment in California is declining. And so we were held harmless on our ADA for a year. And so having higher ADA levels, enrollments going down, our ADA was actually funded at very high levels. I believe our ADA was actually funded over what our enrollment was for one particular year, I think in 21-22 actually. But that's why you see that spike, and then you see it going down because of that. The other thing that was implemented was we went from ADA funding being at the higher of your prior year ADA or current year ADA and being funded based on whichever of those figures was higher to a 3-year rolling average, 3-year prior year rolling average ADA versus current year. So you take your last 3 years, figure out that average, and you're funded on either the higher of that or the current year ADA. So the 3-year rolling average was to help mitigate that big decrease in declining enrollment. But again, all the ADA protections from being held harmless have fallen off, and so now those 92.5% enrollment or ADA percentage figures are kind of now the norm, and so you have a big drop in funded ADA. So that's why you see that on that graph going down so steep. Pension costs, I mentioned this earlier on the previous slide. This is just historically where the pension costs have been and where they are now. And so over the past 10 years and even prior on the CalPERS side, CalPERS was even lower prior to 2014-15. It was, I think, down around 9%. But over the past 10 years, you can see how much the pension contributions have grown. So over 10% on the CalSTR side, which is for all of our certificated staff. And then you can see on the classified side, we're looking at 15% and more as we move out into the future in our contribution. And so what's happened is the employee contribution has remained the same, but the employer contribution has increased. So all of the increased pension costs are passed along to the employer and not onto the employee. So how does all of that impact Berryessa? So I'm going to go over the revenues and expenditures for the next 3 years, the enrollment and ADA, and then what the MYP looks like. So in our proposed budget for 24-25, we're using an enrollment of 6,013. That's a slight decrease in enrollment from this year. We're at about 6,040 in this year. After doing a review of enrollment over the past couple of weeks, our enrollment's looking pretty strong. Not to the point where we can say that we're going to be higher than what this projection is, but it's looking pretty good, especially at the lower levels, TK and Kinder especially. We have some really strong numbers compared to where we typically are by the end of June as far as enrollment goes from what we've projected to who's actually enrolled. So that's a really good sign. So when we come back to school in August, we'll be real telling as to whether or not these figures will be revised at first interim and looking at a higher, potentially a higher enrollment number than what was projected. And then of course, whatever the ADA is when our students return. But right now, the funded ADA is 5,825. That's a 3-year average of our prior year ADA. And so, any increase in enrollment doesn't necessarily lead to an increase in revenue for 24-25 because we're being funded on the prior year's 3-year average. So the way that we would receive more revenue in 24-25 for an increase in enrollment would be if our ADA percentage is high enough to have the ADA higher than 5,825. So to achieve that, based on that enrollment number, we would have to be over or around 90, close to 97% attendance. Okay, so that would be the only way that we would generate more revenue in the current year. Now, that would increased enrollment, of course, then would impact the future years because then we're using that 3-year average ADA, which then is using higher numbers because our enrollment has gone up from what we've projected. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, 1.07% COLA, and then this bottom figure of unduplicated pupil percentage. So 42.67%. That's another area where it's impacting our revenues. Historically, our district's been at about 45%. That's also a 3-year rolling average of our unduplicated count. And so what we've seen coming out of the pandemic is we've seen our unduplicated percentage drop, and it's pretty much at about that 42.5% figure. And you'll see that goes out throughout our MYP. So we kind of hold steady at that percentage. And What it is that it's not on the free and reduced lunch side of that calculation. It's on the English learner side. So we're having less English learners. And so even though we have an increase by, I think, 3 or 4 percentage points on our free and reduced lunch students, we've had a drop on the EL side. And so the unduplicated percentage has then dropped, even though the free and reduced is going up. So wanted to point that out. That hadn't been something that we had seen in the past, but now that's starting to become the reality. And so that's now built into our projections. We thought that with the increase in free and reduced that we would see an increase in unduplicated count, but that's not what we're seeing. Question?
Just on that complicated ADA calculation that you described, I was wondering if it would be beneficial to have a pictorial representation of how it's actually done,
like a what
how
if, or just an actual calculation of what,
how the moving averages work.
Okay.
Maybe realistic data from what our attendance is and how it looks in a tabular format or whatever it is. Maybe you can supplement that to these slides, and when we
Yeah.
post it,
we can put that into the first interim presentation. We
Yeah.
can put in a snapshot like from our calculator that shows the different averages for the LCFF. We can definitely do that.
because it's ADA is, I mean, like we understood, it's critical, it's very crucial, and we need to find a way to increase focus on that part so parents and community knows that this is an important thing. It affects everybody, so it needs to be highlighted as much as possible.
Right.
And if we can make it simpler
Sure.
for anybody to understand,
Okay.
we should
Yeah,
do
we
it.
can look at doing that.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is the calculation of our LCFF funding across the grade span. So this comes straight out of our LCFF calculator that we use. So you can see how the ADA projections then flow through and what the funded ADA is at each of the grade spans, and then how that calculates out to our total funding of $69.2 million there at the bottom. So these are the general fund revenues for 24-25, just in a chart format, to help make it easier to kind of see where those revenues are coming from. So you can see the bulk of the revenues are coming from our LCFF funding from the previous slide at a little over $69 million. We have total revenues of $88.7 million. So that's quite a bit lower than what we've been receiving in the past. So over the past couple of years, we've had a lot of influx in one-time dollars that we've received, and a lot of those are now expired, or they're going away, or they're coming to an end. So we don't see the revenues at that $100 million level like we have in the past. So that's reflective of that. We get about $2.7 million in federal revenue. We still have some other state revenue of 11.3. That's inclusive of like our ELOP programs that Dr. Fuentes mentioned in her report, serving our kids over the summer, after school, during intersession. And then we have other local revenues of about $5.3 million, and that's through a lot of site donations and other funds that we receive outside of both state and federal dollars. So the total expenditures, on the other hand, are still at about $99.5 million. And so because this is inclusive of both sides of the general fund, both unrestricted and restricted, we do have some planned deficit spending on those one-time dollars. So we've received them in the past. We need to spend them. So of course, that's going to lead to spending more than the revenues that we're bringing in for 24-25. But again, those dollars are coming to an end. So the corresponding expenditures for those revenues need to also come to an end. So you can see a little less than half of the expenditures are for certificated salaries. That's the big blue on the right-hand side of $43 million. Classified salaries of $13.8 million. And then that big gray piece of the pie is benefits. So salary and benefits make up a considerable portion of the budget. It's close to 90% of the budget. You can see we spend a little bit on supplies at $1.6 million, services and other operating expenses of $11.7 million, which is inclusive of all of our utilities and things like that. So it's not just contracts, it's a lot of those other just required costs that we have. and then no capital outlay. Most of our capital outlay is coming through the bond program. So taking a look at that, 90% or close to 90%, I think it's about 88% of the expenditures are salary and benefits. That's within kind of that's on the high end of what you typically see within a school district. However, the thing to make note of, and I think I mentioned this last time, is that it's really taking a look at what's the percentage of expenditures for your salaries and benefits as compared to the revenues that you bring in. And so compared to the revenues that we bring in, it's like 98.5% of our revenues go towards salary and benefits. And so that's why we have the structural deficit that we're needing to address. So just want to make sure to point that out. So this is the proposed budget broken down between unrestricted, restricted, and combined. And so you can see the total revenues on the unrestricted side of 74.6 million. Even though there's 63 million in expenditures, what we have to do is we contribute to our restricted programs, which is special education and routine restricted maintenance. Routine restricted maintenance, you'll see on a future slide, is a requirement of 2% of our expenditures have to go to restricted maintenance. And so that's what those transfers out are, leaving a fund balance of $626,000 on the unrestricted side of the general fund. And we have 2 million in restricted balances left, and that's in some of those one-time funds in our federal programs. General fund deficit spending. So we've been deficit spending over the past number of years. And so this is just a history of that, kind of bouncing between a low of $1.5 million in deficit spending to 4.9 million in deficit spending a couple of years back. This current year that we're going into has a deficit spend of 0. However, we are utilizing some funds from Fund 40 to utilize for some restricted expenditures on the maintenance side of the house to help offset and get that to a balanced budget. But that's, that just gives us a little bit more time to help address some of these expenditure reductions that we need to make, and gives us time to make that plan. So we have the school consolidation committee that's working through a lot of that too. That's going to address a lot of that in the 2 out years. So these are the contributions that I just mentioned that make up the $16 million. 13.7 million is going towards supporting our special education program, and then 2.3 million for the routine restricted maintenance. And I think I said 2% before, but it's a 3% contribution. And then this is the general fund contribution for special education going back over the past 10 years. So in 15-16, we were at about 5.9 million in contribution for special education, with this next year being at about 13.7 million. So there's a few things that impact that. Some of the raises, some of the costs of benefits. The special education program in and of itself is just growing. It's not exclusive to Berryessa. It's a state and national thing that's going on where there's just more students qualifying for special education, and so costs are going to naturally go up. It's a essentially unfunded program. We get only a couple of $1 million in total for special education funding, and then I think previously had mentioned that for our special education preschool program, which is continuing to grow as well, we only receive about $350,000 or so for those special education students, which pays for essentially a classroom and a half. But we have significantly more students than that to service. So really a lot of that's due to unfunded programs. We had the drop in 21-22, mainly due to the fact that the pandemic kind of shut down schools. We weren't providing services for a certain number of months, and then when we resumed, we did increase those. But then we also had some one-time COVID relief funds that we're able to utilize to fund some of the special education staff. So that's why you see kind of a little bit of a decrease there for that year, and then it ticked back up as we had to start moving those expenditures back into the general fund. This is our enrollment over the past couple of years, and then what's projected over the next 2 years in the multi-year projection. So we go from a total enrollment of 6,013 in this upcoming year to 5,858 in 25-26 and 5,649 in 26-27. So we had that little bit of an increase in enrollment this year, mainly due to TK, and then we're projecting a slight decrease in this upcoming year, and then back to the same kind of decreases we were seeing over the past 10 years or so. Not quite as significant, but still following the trend that we saw in Tom Williams' presentation a few months ago. We're down to 5,649 and then continuing to decrease subsequent to that. Then you can see on the next couple of lines our total unduplicated pupil count. And so that's that percentage and calculation that I had mentioned before. You can see the number of students there is going down as well. And so that's also leading to a loss in revenue in the future years. And then on the very bottom line, you can see that as a percentage, and you can see how the unduplicated pupil count has been changing over the past 3 years. We were at 46.58% in 21-22, and then in the current year, we're at 42.4%. So 4% drop over the past 2 years in our unduplicated count, leading to that rolling average going down to 42.5% that you can see kind of goes out over the next 2 years. This is our enrollment history. So just a graph version of what was just presented. You know, back in 13-14, we were just under 8,000 students, you know, and now we're sitting right around 6,000 students. So 2,000 student drop within 10 years is pretty significant, a pretty significant decline. This is a comparison of our actual ADA and funded ADA. So just showing the difference between, you know, our 1 year ADA versus what we're funded at, which includes that 3-year rolling average. And then when you look at 21-22, that hold harmless ADA that I had been talking about. So that hold harmless ADA was at 6,668 because our enrollment was over 7,000 in 1920. So we had a much higher ADA back then. And so that really helped us out to get through the pandemic. But now you can see that those numbers are now falling off the calculation because of the actual ADA that you're seeing being used for the calculation. So, you know, we're using 6,103, 5,661, which is a 500 ADA difference almost. And then 5,739, we had a little bit of an uptick in ADA for 23-24 due to that increased enrollment. And then 24-25, we're continuing to go back down slightly, and then projecting out in the future over at that 94.5% level. So if we see that our ADA is trending up as we get into the first interim, then we'll go ahead and start to adjust those numbers. We'll be a little bit more conservative just because we don't know how attendance will trend post first interim, because first interim is everything through October 31st. So it's kind of right at the beginning of school. A lot of kids excited to come back to school. But then what we see is a lot of sickness around the holidays. So, you know, even if we start out with a really strong 88 percentage, we have to still be careful and not include that in our projections moving forward until we kind of get through the holidays and get to the second interim and know how that's really projecting. And what we had seen in the past was we used to see this U-shape with our attendance where we start out really high, August, September, October, start to go down, November, December, January, and then we come back up as we came into the spring. What happened this year was we had that dip and we never recovered. And so that's reflected in our multi-year projection because of the past couple of years, we've had that recovery and we've raised that attendance percentage as we got into the spring and did our P2 submission for our 88 percentage. That didn't happen, and we had just a flat and continued decrease in our 88 percentage. And so that's really impacted the current year ADA, which then impacts the 2 future year ADA. And so that we had to adjust when developing this budget because we didn't have that attendance rebound like we had in the past. So assumptions for 25-26 and 26-27, the unrestricted fund balance when including Fund 17 which is a special reserve fund that's also counted towards our reserve requirement. We have 2.9 million, and we also have 3.5 million in 26-27 because we have a little bit of positive growth in our fund balance on the unrestricted side in that year as we take the school consolidation proposals into effect and into account in those scenarios. So those are included in the 2 out years. This is our enrollment projection and ADA projection, funded ADA projections for the 2 out years. We also are using the COLA as projected. We all know that the COLA fluctuates, so even between January and now, we had a significant drop. Those numbers for COLA can quickly change, as we've seen, especially when you're talking about a year from now and 2 years from now. So we continue to monitor and update those as we go along, and then the unduplicated percentage at the 42% level. So what we typically have built into our expenditures is we have increases for step and column adjustments. So usually we project that to be about 1.5% for all of our staff because they are on salary schedules. So we build that into our projections as well. And then we have our FTE reduction estimates based on school consolidation and declining enrollment built in at 4.9 million in 25-26, because that's when the bulk of that work is going to happen. And then in 26-27, that's mainly FTE reductions based on that declining enrollment that we saw there on the previous slide. This is our multi-year projection, and it includes our estimated actuals for 23-24. You can see we're still deficit spending overall within the general fund. As I mentioned, that's all on the restricted side of the budget. And so this is just kind of summing up what I had on those past 2 slides, and we do meet our 3%. This is the slide that I introduced, I think, last year, the COLA versus our actual revenue increase in this particular instance. It's not an increase, it's a decrease. So even though we have a 1.07% COLA, our LCFF revenue calculation, this doesn't include the add-on in the supplemental. That's why it doesn't match the slide from earlier. This is just taking the grade span calculations. But when you take a look at that, the actual, it's actually a decrease from this year to next because we do have declining enrollment. And so we actually see our funding go down from 61.7 million to 59.28 million. So a decrease of 3.93%. So remember this slide last year, we had this big 8% COLA. And so everybody assumes 8% COLA, cool, we're going to get 8% increase to our revenues. It actually translated into less than a 3% increase in revenues, even with the 8% COLA. So this is the calculation for this year, 1.07% COLA. We're actually getting an almost 4% decrease in LCFF revenues. Hopefully that makes sense. The differences between the second interim and the budget. So I've tried to kind of explain some of these as we've kind of gone along with some of the changes to our ADA calculations and our ADA percentages that we've been using. We've had to adjust those. And so that's impacted this 24-25 budget because that was one of the 2 out years on our multi-year projection. We've also had, we had revenues built in for leasing out the old district office property that we have not yet leased out. We've had some interest in it, but that hasn't come to fruition. So that's had to be adjusted. That's also been adjusted within the budget. The other things that we're taking into account now are some of the increases in utility costs that we've incurred and then had to factor in and staying at that level and increasing PG&E, especially. That was why it was important with the project that Tony brought forward. We're going to be installing some more solar to help save some money, and we're doing some other projects to help mitigate some of those increased costs and utilities. Another thing that really impacted us was in the ELOP program. So in the ELOP program, it's based on your unduplicated percentage. So not only did the state not have as much ELOP dollars to allocate out for 23-24, our unduplicated percentage dropped. So you see it dropped from the 44% to the 42.5%. So our ELOP dollars dropped. And then the allocation just per student was significantly decreased. And so it impacted us by almost $900,000 for 23-24. Those were dollars that we thought we were going to be receiving for our ELOP programs that were turning out to not receive, that we then have to supplement with our general fund. So we may get some of that back. We haven't built that into the budget, but essentially what CDE has done and what the governor has done is he's trying to normalize that calculation. There's 2 tiers of school districts as far as the ELOP calculation is concerned. There's tier 1 districts, which are high unduplicated count districts, and then tier 2 districts, which are the lower unduplicated count districts. So basically, it's the difference between those that receive concentration grant funding and those that don't. We don't receive concentration grant funding, and we're not really close to it. So what happened is the tier 1 school districts receive a much higher rate for ELOP, and they were allocated all of these dollars. The thing that happened is that a lot of those school districts didn't spend all of that money. So you had a certain number of years to spend the ELOP dollars for each year. And so what the governor decided to do is he said he's going to end up having CDE capture all the expenditures for ELOP from all districts by September 30th. And then he's going to sweep all of the unused ELOP dollars from tier 1 and reallocate those dollars to the tier 2 districts. So there's a chance that $900,000 approximately that we lost this year, that we may recoup some of those, but there's not a way right now that we can figure that out about how much that'll be until they actually sweep those dollars in a couple of months. So the last I heard was that we'll have hopefully some projections around January, February, and that we'll receive those dollars by the spring. So hopefully we'll get some of that back to help supplement our programs. But that was a huge area that we saw a significant decrease in revenues that we had been counting on for our students. The other thing that we've had is we've had a significant increase in liability insurance. And so one update that I have from when I gave this presentation from before was that I think in 2019-20, our liability insurance overall was around $450,000. It's now sitting around $1.2 million. It's gone up a significant amount over the past 5 years. And year over year, our increase was about 10% for 24-25, and our JPA overall was a little bit less than that. I think it was around 8%. But the interesting thing was that our insurance provider that we work with as a JPA mentioned that that's actually the lowest percentage increase that he's seen across all the JPAs that provide insurance in the state. So it feels like it was a lot and a high increase, but statewide, others are in much worse shape. So the JPA that we're a part of is actually doing a really good job at helping keep those costs down. And then one of the other major increases, and for us, it's to the tune of a few $100,000 that we had no way to prepare for, to know that we're going to get billed for it, though, is through SELF. So SELF is the insurance group that funds us over and above our $5 million liability limit with our JPA, and they fund us for liability up to $55 million. SELF provides that supplemental insurance to every school district in California, with the exception of LA Unified. So what SELF has had to do, because of the AB 218 claims, where you can go back and sue school districts and sue, any organization for sexual assault or any of those type of claims, school districts have been getting hit with those lawsuits, and a lot of the school districts are covered by SELF. SELF has had to make a lot of these payouts on these claims. And so what we've got now is SELF is kind of going back historically and doing a true up of their insurance, and they're billing all of us. And so for us, I think it's around $300,000. We just recently got our last our bill, but that was something that we didn't know was going to happen. Came because of changes in legislation from a couple of years ago, and so they're an insurance company that, of course, has to recover costs to help pay for these lawsuits that they're having to pay out. So So that was another significant factor that has increased a lot of our expenditures above and beyond what we had thought. So, when you looked at that services and operating expenditures line item, there's almost $2 million of that $11 million that are just for liability alone. So it's a pretty significant cost for school districts right now. So those are kind of some of the main differences that we've had to build in. So what's next? First bullet already happened. Legislature came up with their budget plan. They proposed it to the governor by the June 15th deadline. They had been negotiating that. They came to an agreement over the weekend. Again, they haven't signed off on that, but there's not many significant changes. The governor fully funded Prop 98. He fully funded the COLA. I can't really think of many others that really impact us this year. There's some delays in some of his proposals. There's some ADA mitigation that the governor wants to implement in 25-26. When it comes to ADA recovery, there's some changes to independent study that he's making to implement for this upcoming year for 24-25. Not having a minimum number of days for short-term independent study, for instance, and just having one kind of lumped together short-term, long-term independent study program. So we're gonna have to see what the details of those are and figure out how to implement that as a district to help with our ADA. But it's too tough to comment on his future ADA plans because there's no details to his proposal. So he has a proposal where you can provide a program similar to Saturday school, but you could do it in 15-minute increments after school, before school, during intersessions. But how that's going to work and how you recoup those funds, all of that's being delayed till 25-26. So that was in his proposal. He wanted to have it implemented in 24-25, but he's decided to wait to help get some of those details together so that districts aren't just trying to figure it out as we go along with these new requirements. So the governor should be signing off on the budget officially later this week. And then, as Dr. Fuentes mentioned, School Consolidation Advisory Committee is continuing to meet. We have a meeting tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. It's from 6 to 8 p.m. And then the next one after that is scheduled currently for August 15th. I believe the committee is going to discuss whether or not that date changes to the week prior, but right now it's scheduled for the 15th. Any other questions about the budget or any comments?
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions for the board? Ms. Black, any questions from your side? If you have any questions? Nope.
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the presentation one more time. Thank you for doing that again. All right. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adopt the 24-25 budget.
Move to adopt. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The budget is adopted 5-0. Thank you so much. Next item on the agenda is Measure A, 23-24 Annual Report and Allocations for 24-25 fiscal year. Dr. Fuentes.
It is recommended the board approve the Measure A allocations for the 24-25 fiscal year. I do believe we have a member of the Measure A Oversight Committee who will provide the board a brief report.
Thank you.
My mic isn't working, but we have Margot Sandoval, who's on the committee, here to represent the Oversight Committee and do the presentation and reports to the board.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Margot Sandoval. I am a Measure A committee member. Each year, the Measure A committee presents an annual report to the board. Today, I have the pleasure to be the presenter. Measure A committee began making annual reports to the board on both the fiscal accountability and impact on students of programs and personnel, which are funded by Measure A. This year, the committee met 4 times. The committee is made up of 3 community members, 1 parent of each of the 3 school families in the district who have a child that is currently enrolled in one of those schools, 2 employees representing teachers. Teachers must be nominated by their union CTAB. 2 employees representing classified personnel, CSEA and/or Teamsters, and 2 employees representing management personnel. Each member has committed to a 3-year term. A majority of current active members is needed for a quorum, and a quorum is needed in order to make decisions. Examples would be suggestions on how money should be spent, as well as evaluating how money was spent. We still need to fill 5 vacant membership seats, as they are listed here. The Measure A committee oversight responsibilities are fiscal accountability and impact on students. The annual review of funds received and how they were spent was reviewed at the October 23rd, 2023 meeting. The allocations are consistent with the original proposed Measure A ballot. Each year, the committee provides data to show the board members how Measure A funds impacted students. The year the district this year, the district used the Smarter Balance Assessment to test for English language, arts, and math for all students from 3rd to 8th grade. Measure A funds the following special types of programs and services. They attract and retain qualified teachers, maintaining science and math proficiencies, as well as technology and counseling, keeping school libraries open, providing hands-on science instruction, keeping school technology up to date, and funding programs that enhance student achievement. The bar chart compares the percentage of students meeting or exceeding the English language arts standard across 3 entities: Berryessa Union School District, Santa Clara, and the state of California from the year 2021-22 to the year 2023-24. Berryessa Union School District consistently performs higher than both Santa Clara and the state of California across all years. The percentage of students meeting or exceeding the standard increase for Berryessa Union School District from 66.26% in 21-22 to 64.6% in 23-24. The data for Santa Clara and the state of California in 23-24 has not been released. The bar chart highlights the percentage of students meeting or exceeding the mathematical standards of Berryessa Union School District from the 21-22 to 23-24 school years. Berryessa Union School District consistently performs higher than both Santa Clara and the state of California across all years, starting at 54.8% in 21-22, slightly increasing to 55.2% in 22-23, and reaching 55.3% in 23-24. The data for Santa Clara and the state of California in 23-24 has not been released. The number of positions funded by Measure A or less than was designated in the beginning. Salaries continue to increase, whether it be by step in column raises and or increases in benefits. The positions that can no longer be funded by Measure A are funded through other unrestricted funds. This concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions on the board? Trustee Howe.
Hi, Margo. Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have a quick question for you. I noticed there's no allocation funding for counselors. What is the reason for that?
So right now, counselors are being funded through the local accountability plan, LCAP.
Hey, thank you.
You're welcome.
I can share that a lot of it's just due to the fact that the salaries and benefits have gone up and there's just not enough remaining funding to fund the position. So we've shifted those costs.
Any other questions from the board? Ms. Boak, any questions from your side?
No.
All right. Thank you so much for the
Thank
presentation.
you. Good night.
All right. We will need a motion to approve the annual report and allocations for Measure A. Is there a motion from the board?
Move to approve.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you so much. Next item on the list is School Consolidation Advisory Committee replacement. Dr. Fuentes?
Yes, thank you. As previously mentioned, our committee has been very dedicated to being part of the school consolidation process. We have had a parent who was representing Sierramont Middle School have to step down from the committee due to moving out of our area. So we do have another applicant that is interested in continuing in that individual's place. Their name is Melissa Monges. And so it is recommended that the board approve Melissa to be part of our School Consolidation Advisory Committee.
Thank you for that. Is there a motion to approve the parent?
I have a quick question before there's a
Yes,
motion.
please.
Can Melissa be given materials to catch up to what the consolidation committee has discussed so far?
Yes, absolutely. As a matter of fact, Mr. Franklin, he'll be doing that with her, so that way she can get caught up in her application process. She did share that she's been reviewing all the minutes and our agendas and the presentations, but we'll still go ahead and do a one-to-one with her. And we also provide that opportunity when any of our members do have to miss a meeting for emergency purposes.
Okay, wonderful. And with that, I move to approve Melissa's appointment.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you so much. Next item on the agenda under Human Resources, we have public hearing acceptance of the 24-26 Sunshine proposal for the CTAB according to Government Code Section 3547. Dr. Fuentes?
It is recommended the board conduct first a public hearing and then accept the Sunshine proposal for CTAB for negotiations.
Thank you. I'll open it for public hearing. Seeing no comments from the public, I'll close the public hearing. And I will entertain a motion for the acceptance of the 24-26 Sunshine proposal for CETA.
I move to approve the Sunshine proposal.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. If there are no questions, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you so much. The next item on the agenda is Resolution 23-21, authorizing participation in self-insured schools of California. 3 is a 3 Roman 3 SISC 3. Dr. Fuentes.
It is recommended that the board adopt Resolution 2321, authorizing participation in self-insured schools of California, SISC 3. I do want to just say thank you to Mr. Franklin as well as Mr. Cabrera for coordinating our Health Benefits Committee and for all the individuals that were part of that discussion to be able to review various options that could be of benefit both to the district as well as our employees.
Perfect. Are there any questions on this resolution? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the resolution.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We'll go with a roll call vote on this one, Ms. Gomez.
Yes. President Srinivasan,
Aye.
Trustee Jimenez,
Aye.
Trustee Haug,
Aye.
Trustee Nguyen,
Aye.
Trustee Boak,
Aye.
Thank you for that. Resolution 2321 is passed unanimously. Next, we have the joint exercise of power agreement for the operation of Common Risk Management and Insurance Program SISC 3. Dr. Fuentes?
It is recommended the board approve the joint exercise of powers agreement for the operation of Common Risk Management and Insurance Programs, SISC 3, and this supports the previous resolution that the board has approved.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion on this one.
Move to approve.
It's been moved. Okay, we have moved. We have a motion and a second over here, Ms. Boak. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. Thank you for that. That's on the agenda. Any requests for staff follow-up or items for future agendas from the board? Okay. Ms. Boak, anything from your side?
Nothing from my side.
Thank you. In that case, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Meeting is adjourned at 7:04. Thank you so much for being here.